What dark family secret family history have you uncovered? My great aunt and uncle were the sweetest people imaginable. When I was growing up they lived 4 houses down, so I used to go around to their house a lot after school. My uncle Jimmy used to play dollies and tea party with me. I have very fond memories of them. When my uncle Jimmy died I remember all these very professional looking old men at his funeral surrounded by what looked like to me security guards. My mum casually mentioned to me many years later that my uncle Jimmy was an old-fashioned English gangster. He did time for robbery and sex trafficking. He was also accused of murdering 4 people, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. I was gobsmacked. Additional to this, my lovely auntie Diane. His wife was the madam at one of his brothels and recruited his sex slaves. She had also done time. I put 2 and 2 together and realized those men at his funeral were old gangsters. It really messed me up. My great-grandmother was a dirty Irish scam to marrying her. Sorry, Nanny. Then collect a percentage of their pay used to scam multiple American and British soldiers who would come to Liverpool. My great-grandfather was an artsy captain. Like pretty high up. He even had Heinrich Himmler himself over for dinner at one time if I recall correctly. After the war was over he fled and got prosecuted. Not sure what happened to him after that. It wasn't necessarily a secret, but nobody talked about the picture on the mantle at my aunt and uncle's. I found out a few years ago that they had lost their oldest child, of 3, when he was 11 to leukemia. He had been my dad's best friend. Changed a lot about who they were and gave me new perspective on them. Sweetest people ever. But there is a never-ending sadness there. Parents should never have to bury their children. I just found out that my mother was divorced by my father via email, while he was away working overseas at Sudan. Turns out my dad met his high school ex during work and decided to marry her. You know, first love and stuff. Soon after she received the email, she got dressed up, leave the house leaving me and twin brother alone, while being pregnant with my youngest sister, to fill in divorce papers at the court. Also, my mum struggled so much when she was financially broke after being divorced, that she had to go house by house in my neighborhood just to ask for some money support from them. God knows what else she's been through. Edit, please stop loathing my dad. I believe it was just a mistake. Something that he would done it anyway. And it just happens at wrong timing. Yes, both parties are doing really well. My mum have a very stable job RN. And my dad gets to do the business stuff that he always wanted to do. My siblings are adults ATM. All of us are basically able to handle things by ourselves. Thanks for the kind words. My great-grandfather was a bootlegger, and later, allegedly a cannibal during the Great Depression. I say allegedly because his friends claimed it was a rumor he started to keep people from messing with his family. They could never disprove it, though, because even up to his death he swore he'd eaten a rival's liver. I should note he was a Native American, so he got the nickname Wen, short for Wendigo. My grandpa said it was all for show, though, cause Wen had to fight over things like milk and threaten the power company employees to keep them from turning the power off. I have no idea how much is true, cause it seemed to be embellished all the way up to my grandpa's death. Got a decent one. But the thread's 3 hours old, so fair chance it gets read by more than a few people. Still, I'd rather not link it to my account. Uncle John went off to WW2. He even participated in the D-Day landings. He comes back from the war alive and whole. Things are good for a while. Then suddenly one night his wife stabs him to death in his sleep. She confesses and says he snored too loud and it drove her crazy. Thing is, it wasn't his wife. His son was psychotic and mentally ill. She went to prison for the next 30 years for his crime of killing his father. Pretty ducking dark, and only a few of us know. We found a picture of 2 great-aunts arm in arm with Hitler. We also have a signed photograph of Mussolini. That my great-great-great-grandpa left England for America and was supposed to send money for them to come over, but he never did. He just started a new family in America. Have a second cousin that murdered his siblings and parents for insurance money. He didn't get away with it, but only spent around 20 years in prison. He's out now, but no one talks about him or will speak to him. The only reason I even know is my parents warned me if he ever reaches out to me that I shouldn't talk to him. I managed to find out about him and what happened by googling him. Edit. To answer the questions, the murders happened in the late 70s. He was sentenced to 45 years, but only served 20. He was a minor. After he got out, it caused a pretty big uproar to the point that they changed the law. Believe it or not, it happened in Texas. If he does contact you, the first thing you tell him is I don't have any life insurance. Edit. Thanks for the gold. My uncle got his wife pregnant at 17. He was 30 and that's why her family got so angry. I always noticed that my aunt seemed really young. When I grew up and did the math, I realized that my uncle impregnated her and married her when she was 40. He was 19. Not exactly dark, but after my grandpa died we were going through his stuff and found an old letter. My white, very Christian, very conservative grandpa had gotten kicked out of college for organizing a panty raid and somehow no one ever knew. Of course, we framed the letter and it's now hanging on the wall of my grandma's house. My mother told me a story about being at a small funeral in the late 1950s, East Texas. The deceased was mentally challenged, and the family was relieved to have the child at peace. During the service, the coffin began to rock, and crying was heard. Then she was taken outside and watched as the coffin was carried to the cemetery next to the church and hurriedly buried. I was telling my kids this years later, and my mother walked in the room, listened for a moment, and asked, "Are you telling them about Uncle Chucky what? You seem to have forgotten to mention the connection before." Edit. I cannot swear to the authenticity of the tale, but my mother swore by it and she was not the joking sort. It has caused a decent amount of dark brooding about being buried alive in my youth. My mother left her sister to die in an apartment when she should have taken her to the hospital for gastric bleeding or something to that effect. Mom still doesn't understand why she wasn't invited to the funeral services for her parents. She's a classic narcissistic money-sucking whore. When my mother died, I found out my uncle is really my dad. Mother's brother or father's? Father's brother. Apparently she got drunk and slept with my uncle one night before they were married. But she told my dad that I belonged to some other man so he wouldn't be upset at the brother aspect. My uncle didn't know until she was dying. He went to visit her in the hospital and she told him that I was his and that she never told his brother. Then after she passed, he decided to sit me down and tell me. I told him it changes nothing. My daddy is my daddy. He still doesn't know, and if he does find out, it won't be me who tells him. He's my dad.